Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to discuss female leadership in male-dominated industries with you. My name is Janina Steinmetz. I'm the director of the Global Women's Leadership Program here at Bayes. And I have four amazing speakers here who are willing to share their experience in male-dominated industries and to share their career experience and what we can do to reduce the gap of female leadership in male-dominated industries. So join me in thanking them for being here with a round of applause. And I will let them introduce themselves.
Thank you. Does it work?
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Natasha. I actually have a lot more fun than being only a part of real estate industry. I work in venture capital, which is probably even more male-dominated than real estate. But the fund that I work for invests in real estate technology. So I have double the fun. I work, so my title is partner, and the technologies that I invest in, their route to market is via real estate industry. The company that I work for is a global fund. We are a US venture capital organization with global presence. So I run the UK office. In fact, we set it up back in 2020. We were announced as the latest expansion territory of the fund a week before the national lockdown. And it was also my pivot in my career, because before I was a startup founder, so talking about fails, and my startup was in electric mobility. So there's a lot of interesting stories from there. My first speaking engagement, which like literally everything about it went wrong. And I see like every time I'm on stage, by the way, my heart's beating. And supposedly now I do a lot of it, but every time it's unnerving. And I'm sure that all of you here have a story or two to share that I would absolutely love to connect and explore later. But sort of where we are right now in terms of diversity, there's in the UK venture capital industry, especially in the prop tech, which is my vertical, there's not a single female partner, but me. Getting there was an interesting journey because I started as a director and I was promoted to a partner about a couple of years ago. And there's also a little story that I think I baffled the market with fairly recently. So I left my fund and I've joined another fund as a partner. Long story short, I ended up rejoining my fund because they finally made me an offer that was exactly the same with my male colleague. Well done. I had to go nuclear.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulina, and I remember a year ago we talked with Janina about this topic of this event today. And, when I'm thinking about myself and my different career stages, I'm actually laughing because let me just briefly enumerate you how male-dominated industries and spaces I've been to. So I'm a finance faculty at a business school. This is the 8th business school that I'm teaching at. And let me tell you that it is indeed a different business school because finance faculty is extremely male dominated. I used to work for publicly listed companies as an investor relation manager. All CEOs I worked with were men. And when I was entering the room of 30, 50 investors, maybe there were 2, 3 female investors. The rest was men and analysts. I was a CEO of a failed startup, fintech startup, finance, male-dominated, tech, male-dominated. And then on top of that, you meet investors, venture capital, and they're all male-dominated. And who brings the tech? Mostly men. So most of the CEOs or CTOs are also men. So everything is about men. And last but not least, I'm a research fellow at the Mark Research Center here at Bayes, which is M&A Research Center. And there is literally one woman in the world that is a partner of M&A in any consulting company, and that's KPMG. So that's another male-dominated space. And I think that's enough.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Leanne Nicol and I'm the Chief Exec at 50/50 Parliament. So I've been in the charity sector for almost 20 years and I'm fairly new to this role. but have been following the political landscape for quite a while. We're a small charity that campaigns for gender parity in Parliament. We've been going for 10 years. It was founded by a lady called Frances Scott, who started with a petition. I think it was about 26% representation when she started it, and we're now at 35%, which is good, but not good enough. There has been progress, and there are a lot of women working in Parliament to try and change things that will mean that Parliament is a more attractive place that appeals to the brightest and best women in this country, but we have a long way to go. We may get a bump in women's representation in Parliament at the next election. And I am a little worried that the media might say job done if that happens, but we'll still be a long way off. We're currently around 70 to 100 years off gender parity if we continue at the current pace, and that is just completely appalling to me. We believe that representation shapes policy and policy shapes lives, and so if the women are not sat at the table, then those needs are being completely neglected. And we saw that with the COVID inquiry, where they commented that the macho atmosphere meant that issues that affected women mostly, such as domestic abuse, the safety equipment for health workers not being the right sort of size, things like the childcare issues were completely sidelined because they weren't listening to the women who were in the room, and there weren't enough women in the room. If we were to redesign democracy today, there's no way that we wouldn't make it representative across all sort of protected characteristics and completely representative of our country. So we need to start accelerating this and get there faster, and that is what I've been brought in to do, and I'm an incredibly impatient person. So watch this space.
Hi everyone, I'm Antonia, and I work on the other side of the political space where I work for the civil service. So I head up the Maritime Environmental Analysis team in the Department for Transport. I've been part of the civil service for just over 10 years now, and have worked in all manners of transport. I've only recently got my first proper female line manager, which I think says a lot. The civil service has a very mixed picture on this one. So actually the Department for Transport where I work tends to be more balanced towards women, but it's not reflective of most departments in the civil service. And it's not reflected in the senior positions in the civil service. The other side of that is that we work with a lot of MPs, ministers, stakeholders, and all of those tend to be more male dominated, and a lot of kind of engagement, which means the policy development tends to be with men as well. And I think it's very important when you're developing policy that affects everyone in the UK for it to reflect everybody in the UK. So that's kind of been my journey, and it's very varied again across different sectors. So now I'm in shipping. Roads is quite similar there. I work for National Highways on secondment from DFT. And yeah, again, that one was particularly male dominated, and a lot of that kind of operational mindset. It was often, you know, the conversations and things maybe wouldn't be female appropriate or like, yeah. But yeah, so I think although I'm in a better position now, I wouldn't say that on average that's been the experience. And I took some time to talk to a lot of my colleagues, and I think that's definitely reflective of their experience as well.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing your experiences. I think we already touched upon a few very important points. So globally, the share of women in leadership positions has risen over the past years. And this makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of research showing that having diversity in leadership positions actually benefits companies and benefits organizations. So there isn't really a reason why we shouldn't increase diversity in leadership positions. But still, a lot of this progress has happened in industries that tend to be female dominated. And there are still some industries where there are very few, if any, women in leadership positions. For example, energy, manufacturing, and infrastructure are among these industries. And even women who rise to leadership positions, especially in very male-dominated industries, report problems, for example, imposter syndrome, even sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination due to gender stereotyping, not least. So I want to start with kind of all speakers and get your experience. What has your experience been like working in male-dominated industries, or also supporting other women in male-dominated industries?
I mean, where do you start? It's 100%. It's a big question. I moved to the UK 20 years ago to do my MBA. I'm also a very impatient person, so I can definitely sympathize with that. I was just about the age when the MBA students were, I had 2 years experience, I had the minimum of everything just to be accepted. And the first job out of university was for Lloyd's of London broker. So I would probably say, I don't know what the insurance stats are, but sort of looking at the city, just sort of the brief look kind of gives me the idea that it's probably not exactly particularly diverse. So my career was always in technology. So I spent 10 years in the city before I launched my startup. It's, you know, some of the stories. I mean, I was asked not to wear heels once because apparently I stomp around and I distract people. I mean, you know, there was like silly stories, but I guess, you know what, like you just grow thick skin and things just don't get to you like that anymore. Although sometimes it's like really, like you don't feel it's as deserved. And, you know, sometimes I feel that there's data. There's, you know, just as you say, you know, there's data that is showing us that having diverse teams in startups actually makes them more profitable. They are more successful. You know, we know that it's there. One of the last conferences I attended, and it was one of the biggest sort of real estate prop tech conferences, they asked me to speak about diversity, about why we need it. I was like, I don't want to speak about the why, I want to speak about the how. And we tend to compare sort of real estate, or specifically prop tech, property technology, we tend to compare ourselves with fintech. And one of my good friends that runs a fantastic organization called Code First Girls, Anna, they have done such an amazing job in trying to achieve the gender parity in the sort of financial sector. And one of the case studies that they use is the case study of NatWest, when they increased the number of females, and and the bank actually, so the financial performance of the bank improved drastically. And the reason why, and it's know your client. If that's exactly what we're like, the change is systemic. You know, if you are serving both male and female clients, you need to understand your client, like first and foremost. There's so many exciting things that I get personally involved in the industry. So in real estate, there's a fantastic program called Mentoring Circle, which I am a mentor on, that is aimed at junior female in real estate to connect with the mentors and help them to sort of grow through the property ladder. They didn't have a single technology mentor. I was the first one because it's still very much sort of within the real estate traditional industry. So there's a lot of interesting things happening, but it's, I mean, talking about my experience on camera as well is interesting, but yeah, it's difficult, but doable.
So Janina, I'm gonna bring my statistics. So let me just share 3 fun facts with you. I mean, I'm not sure they're that fun, but in the US, among publicly listed companies, there is more CEOs named John than female CEOs. In Japan, there are only 16 out of 1,800 plus companies from the Tokyo Stock Exchange that are run by women. I mean, the chief is the woman. In the UK, coming to entrepreneurship and fintech perspective, in the UK, we have the highest level of gender bias funding entrepreneurs, 54%, against, for instance, in China, 17%. So over 50% of female founders feel biased, and they're not as funded as male counterparts. And so how is it to work with this? I'm not going to hide that there are reasons why I like working with men, because I'm introverted and I'm very target focused. It's very easy to work with logical minds who are also, you know, target oriented, focused on the goal. And so it depends on your personality. So I really appreciated over the years a lot of features that men bring to the table, but it's also hard. And let me give you another example. When I was doing investor relations and me and my CFO were entering the room of 30, 50 investors and analysts, they would only listen to him. I was having my part, but it was extremely neglected. When I was in the room myself and they didn't have a choice, of course they would listen to me. But the thing is that I myself called it a 30 seconds rule or 30 seconds window. A blonde girl enters a room full of male investors, and I have literally 30 seconds to prove them that what I'm going to say is meaningful. Because otherwise, after 30 seconds, they're going to discard whatever I'm saying if I'm not proving them that I'm worthy. If a man enters a room and starts talking, it doesn't really matter what he says. By default, he's accounted as, yes, this is the right person on the right position, so let's listen what he has to say. And this is my personal experience, how hard it is. Yes. I'll pass on.
Yeah, I want to add something to this. So we always try to create this, the right support infrastructure for the female founders. And we wanted to run an event for our female founders and for the industry. Do you have about 4? So out of 26 companies, I have 4 female founders, 4 in 26. They said, but what am I going to do there? All my buyers are men.
That's so
That's sad, isn't it?
really good points. And I think the book, I've got the right title for the book, The Authority Gap. That's really interesting in people really listening to male voices over female voices, no matter what your credentials are. So I've worked in the charity sector, as I said, for 20 years, and that is very female dominated at the lower levels and at senior management, but not at board level. So, and I, as somebody who worked in capital appeals and then as an executive director and CEO, I deal a lot with the boards, and I have been belittled, even as a CEO, patronised, experienced sexual harassment, been pregnant and screwed, if anybody is aware of that organisation. That happened to me. So it's not, the charity sector has got an image of being sort of light and fluffy and very female, but once you get to board level, you will encounter those same blocks and barriers. And it's not easy being a woman CEO in a charity. It is different, as I was explaining to the Dean earlier, it is different in the sector I'm working in now, sort of unsurprisingly. The women's democracy sector, we work very collaboratively, and it's a very different vibe from what I have had in other parts of the charity sector. And then with regards to Parliament, you will be aware that it has been, Westminster has been nicknamed Pestminster, I'm sure. It is currently, it's not designed for women. It's only been sort of 100 years since we were able to stand, and progress, as I said, has been very slow. So things like caring responsibilities, women generally have the bulk of the caring responsibilities. That's starting to be factored into Parliament, but it's slow progress, and it's also a massive barrier for candidate selection. Women are expected to go out campaigning, which there are financial barriers to that, as well as the barriers of caring responsibility. So we need to sort of scoot back a little bit to candidate selection and look at why women are not putting themselves forward in the first place, as well as the barriers then to actually getting selected. A lot of some parties, associations, local associations who do the candidate selections are heavily male, and that there can be bias there. So we need to circle back. We need to be looking at candidate selections, and we need to be looking at the culture in Westminster at the same time, and sort of a two-pronged attack on increasing female representation.
That culture element where ensuring that you've got the right panel is something that I've noticed in our area anyway. So I'm an economist by background, and it's rather interesting because we have quite a few analytical fields, and economists tend to be more men. And we have to have a diverse panel but the amount of people that are scrabbling around to find a female economist because they can't find one quick enough to create their diverse panel is an interesting one, where you get like one person that will do so many interviews because they were the only one available. But yeah, I think my sort of career has been more, I almost refer to it as covert versus overt sexism, where like it's more those kind of little things where you're not listened to as quickly. I think that 30-second comment one is really interesting, and kind of having to set yourself up before meetings so that you've got that kind of male introduction or that male ally in meetings. Because like, you know, my boss would be male and he would almost have to introduce me as though I knew what I was talking about, rather than me feeling like I could just go in, because it would be a whole room of men. Particularly in some of my previous roles, less. And then I've also noticed kind of as I've moved up in the sort of ranks, as it were, noticing how the different kind of junior colleagues are treated as well. So even when it's supposed to be kind of fair and equal, it doesn't always work out like that when you're engaging with people. And often if they have a softer voice, they're not listened to, or if they demonstrate a kind of more caring nature, it's considered sort of weaker or something, when actually the results might still be there. It's just that they've focused more on developing the relationship. And I think then that follows through into kind of what you see as a valuable outcome. So if you're building those relationships, that might have payoff in the longer term, but it's not counted because it's not the immediate effect. And I've really noticed that, where actually if I manage a team, a lot of the time the women in the team will develop those relationships and have great, like, and are able to then have a network, which maybe the male colleagues don't as naturally. And it varies personality wise as well. But on average, I think that I've noticed a more collaborative approach with women, because I think you have to a lot of the time, because that's how you make your network to make your impact. But yeah, I think mentoring is also a really important one. I definitely have made that my mission with a lot of kind of junior analysts, particularly, just because I think it's that confidence, again, the imposter syndrome that you talk about. Like, I think that's what I hear all the time is like, oh, I'm like, why should I put myself forward? How do I talk about my successes in a way that isn't bragging? And it's sort of, I don't get those questions from men in the same way. Obviously, it's generalizing, you'll still get men who are underconfident, but that's been the average experience for me. And that's what I was taught as well, kind of like my male managers was like, you've got every right to be in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you bring up confidence, because that's such a common advice or recommendation, I think, for women. Just be confident, just be assertive, and the rest will kind of follow from this. But that also kind of places the burden of change on women. So that basically means if all we have to do is make women confident and assertive, men have to do nothing, and the company has to do nothing, but women can just kind of fix their behavior and that will solve it. So has that advice been given to all of you, and have you followed it, or how have you dealt with that kind of confidence advice?
You look like you're going to go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I'm quite an assertive person naturally, so that is sort of my personality. As I was talking to the panelists earlier, I'm the youngest of 6, so like I have to, be quite assertive to be heard at all. So that's my natural stance. So I don't think I have potentially I haven't been given that advice, but I also think it would be the wrong advice. I think I know authenticity is an overused word now, but I think confidence comes from authenticity. And I think that, there is this sort of stereotype of a leader being sort of loud and assertive and very confident. But then we have had recently female leaders who have bucked that trend. So I'm thinking of Jacinda Ardern, I'm thinking of Malala Yousafzai. They have a different sort of quiet confidence. They lead with compassion, and it's a different model that I think, you talked about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome would indicate or signal that there is something wrong with you and you shouldn't be in there, when actually it's the place that is wrong, it's the system that is wrong, it's how it's been designed that is wrong. So you go in as yourself, and that system should be changing around you. So the onus should not be on the woman to change to become more like a man and to be able to succeed in industries.
I would agree with that. I think I think there's that misunderstanding, and I think that's almost that generation a little bit before, to some extent, where you have to be aggressive, you have to be forthright, otherwise you won't have that impact. And I think that quiet confidence is a really important one. And I've really noticed that with that I mean, sometimes it does reflect a sort of burden sometimes that you do have to be the one that's almost like caring, but equally, if you are able to do your job and like kind of have your capability and your authentic self, I think that's, I know it is a bit buzzwordy, but it is true. I've really noticed that, especially like if you have that knowledge as well, like I think as an analyst, you're kind of like a specialist. So you can go in with a little bit of confidence that you are the person that's advising. I think the challenge comes is that if you don't have that confidence to start with a little bit, which I think is where no matter what your gender, you kind of have to work a little bit at it as well. I think the other issue I've had is that seeing kind of some senior leaders take a slight, it's almost a personality then and where the cultural impact happens. So kind of some of our male leaders, it's more impactful if you get a bad male leader versus a bad female leader, which I think echoes that culture of listening. Yeah, and I've really noticed that actually. Yeah.
So confidence and assertiveness, I mean, they're separate, but they're kind of in one basket. And when I think about it, I think that in principle, let's say in theory, it's a good advice, but I have a different problem with that because I don't know what is your experience, but I have seen or been in situations where when a man shows confidence and assertiveness, it's all good because he's the guy and he rules the room. But when a woman shows assertiveness and confidence, she's just ignorant, and this is not taken really well. I mean, so to what extent we should take that advice, I don't know. Separate note, you know, when I was a junior lecturer and just starting teaching, and I was teaching postgraduate MBA programs and core finance courses, you know, when you have MBA students, half of them don't want to be in the finance course as a starting point. So, you know, in the evaluations, you would see like, oh, but it's so tough, but it's this, but it's that. And in the early years, I would sometimes share, for instance, this kind of feedback with my parents, and my parents would be, why didn't you choose to teach marketing? Everybody loves marketing. But I was like, but finance is my thing. You know, this is what I want to do in the industry and in the academia. And I think that the best advice that I've received some time ago was just do what you love. Because this authenticity, what you're talking about, comes from if you're doing what you love, it's always easier. If you're fighting with windmills because for the sake of, you know, proving something, it's not necessarily the same thing as having the passion to do something and then trying to make the space to be able to work in what you love. So I think for me, that was one of the most important things.
That's good advice.
I think with confidence, it's I was never actually given the advice to be confident. That not that I am, or I don't know. But what's interesting is so when you try to say, for example, your first stage presence, you know, what I've alluded to right at the start. So my in a very naive way, in 2015, I decided that the best way to live corporate world and to manage my time better, little did I know, was to launch a startup. That startup was in light electric mobility. So mobility as a service did not even become a word then. And we were the first electric scooter provider in the UK who were servicing the last mile delivery and the food delivery to that. And you know, if you see new mopeds delivering Domino's pizza, that'll be my doing. That was my first client. And and I was invited to speak at the Transport Systems Catapult
Oh yeah.
to talk about the new mobility business model. And I'm this like little moped girl, you know, like I don't like, you don't almost don't see yourself as a part of this like massive thing. It's like, it's just, you know, I guess, you know, that's also the way probably, maybe it's a female perspective. You just don't have this, like, you know, my business worth like 100 million because I sold one scooter. I see a lot of that, by the way, with my own. It was like, I literally had that, I've interviewed a number of startups yesterday, and then the one had like, the revenue is 70,000, the valuation is 10 million. I was like, how do you actually get that? But that's another story. So, and that was my first speaking engagement. I have never spoken public before. I was so scared. And then I went to do this training course, like public speaking training course. And then I ended up, and it was a 20-minute, like almost like a TED Talk style. So I've learned it by heart, like all of it, the slides, everything. So it was, and what I realized through experience that I don't do things by heart. I like engaging, and my thought process is different. And sometimes I make an odd joke, and and then I looked at the list of attendees, and my heart sank. It was like the C-suite of BMW and Mercedes, and I was electric moped girl. I was in ripped jeans and Converse, and all of a sudden I decided to wear like a seated dress. Little did I know that you had to do all of this, and I had wires of things coming out of me. So I come out, I crack a joke. It's I think I've just nailed wearable fashion. Everyone laughs. I do my presentation. Then I decide to make another joke, and I entirely forget where I was at. That was probably the longest 30 seconds in my life. So sort of back to the confidence thing, how do we get to the position when we're actually confident to sit on stage and say what we say? Like we look at what other people do, for the lack of mentors. So, and I know that it's probably also overused, the whole role model notion, but it does. I remember when I started in venture capital after, the startup world, sort of, being on the other side of the table, now all of a sudden giving money. And 6 months in, I didn't know nothing about real estate too, by the way, because I came from electric mopeds. And I did one of these biggest speaking engagements, and I was like, because I see how people do this, and they don't move, their hands are like this, and it has taken me a year to be this. But that's also kind of that's a learning curve. I think the support and what you do at base is so incredibly important. Connecting, talking, and I know that in my industry, it's not authenticity is actually hard to find. So definitely, probably in venture is not that overused. I think be yourself is the hardest thing to be, because you look and you want to try to sort of fit the mold.
Yeah, very important point. Yeah. Leanne, your organization works specifically to foster gender equality in a specific industry in politics. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you actually do that and whether there are learnings for other industries in that?
So first we name the problem, and then we publicize the problem, because creating noise around it, people start to notice and think potentially this could be something that is a vote winner. We look at what the parties that are doing well are doing, and start inquiring with other parties as to why they are not doing those same things that are creating success in women's representation. We underline how it is better for everyone. So, we have to bring people along with us. This is not the future is female. That's not what we are doing. We are saying that with equal representation, it's a better democracy for all. And there is research that underpins that gender parity in governance creates safer, healthier, and more prosperous nations. So it's similar to the research that was mentioned earlier. I think BlackRock had something out with regards to profitability when there is increased female representation. It's a similar sort of thing. It makes it better for everybody. We also make sure that we are clear that we want men and women working together. We're not excluding anybody. We want everyone. We've got some massive existential issues on the horizon that we have to tackle together, and we need diversity in all senses of voices to tackle those problems. So the case is pretty strong, and it's just about making sure people are aware of it. We recruit male allies. We build supportive networks. Mentoring was mentioned. Mentoring is incredibly important. Maybe specifically even male mentors, to make sure that everyone has buy-in, and then finally be relentless.
I think both of you now mentioned male allies specifically, and I know many men want to be allies in fighting for gender equality because, first of all, they realize the importance of it and also the benefit for the organization. are there specific things that men or male allies in general can do to improve the experience of women in male-dominated industries?
Well, I think even just becoming a male ally, even just having that sort of presence, I back this, I agree with this, makes a difference. And then taking a role as mentor, asking what they can do, heading up some stuff, leading on some stuff, not waiting for, you know, the women to pick up the bulk of the work, find out what is going to make difference in female representation and start actioning it. And talk to, you know, make sure that you're talking and including your female colleagues, and make sure that it's, you know, the right sort of things. But absolutely, don't wait to be asked, I'd say. Just start getting in there and finding out what it is that you can do.
That's such a good point on the making them lead. I definitely have noticed that if it's part of like a gender network or a BAME network, it's headed up by somebody who is from that. Like you don't see the membership as much of everybody, and like kind of the gender network tends to be pushed by women and not men.
And it's an additional job, right?
It is,
On top
yeah.
of your actual job.
Which is the other thing I was going to say, the administrative burden that women carry is really interesting. I've really noticed this at work recently, where we put on a spreadsheet all the corporate roles in our like leadership team. And it was so dominated by the women doing a lot of these extra bits that the men didn't do. And I think seeing it so starkly meant that they all started taking other ones on. But I think that kind of thing is almost that covert type stuff where it just happens because I think women naturally pick up stuff because they think they should. But yeah, I think the kind of allyship comes from having that open conversation as well. Like I've been very lucky that I've had a really strong male mentor. And one of the best things he said to me was, you know, I mean, this is more specific for an economist in this situation, but he was always like, we've all got the same educational background. Like, you know, you enter as an economist, you have to have a degree in economics. Why would you be less valid than anybody else with this opinion? Yes, they might have had a little bit more experience in applying it, but you know your stuff. And like just that from the starting point made me feel a lot stronger in it. So actually like having somebody to help reaffirm like that's their way of thinking, because actually if we could get into that male mindset sometimes a little bit more of just having, I know we come back to confidence, but isn't it, there's like a stat where like men will look at a job description and if they can tick 3 out of 10 then they'll go for it, whereas women have to do 9 out of 10. And I really see that with women, like they just don't go for it. And I think having a male voice sometimes just to be like, why wouldn't you? Like really helps. Yeah.
That's why we have 50/50 charity have the Ask Her to Stand campaign.
Yeah.
Because it's been proven that women need to be asked to
We do,
stand.
yeah.
We need to be told we're good enough, whereas men wake up and think, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a senior role came up and I didn't think I would go for it. And then after it shut, loads of people went, why didn't you go for it? And I was like, because I didn't think I should. And then afterwards was told that I should have gone for it. But yeah, I think even now I'm still learning that I should push myself a bit harder on some of these things. But yeah, you do need that echo. Yeah.
I've been lucky enough actually, because my co-partner, so I've got a co-partner, we both at the helm of leading the UK entity, and he's my biggest supporter. I mean, you know, I think it's incredible to have, and we have very different skill set as well. You know, one of the things I tend to say right now as well, and that was something Antonia said, that there's women better at softer skills. So, you know, if we talk about technology and then the whole notion that AI is going to steal everyone's jobs, the way I think about it is like we all have access to the same technology. What's going to move us forward essentially is going to be softer skills, really. So, but I think having the right support and know where to go is incredibly important anyway. In terms of, I can't say that, you know, I had the sort of a strong mentor throughout my career or something like that, but having Paolo right now, like by my side, that's the reason why I returned back. And he was also advocating for me coming back on the terms that he thought I deserved. So you do need advocates.
That's really heartening to hear.
Yeah.
With regards to pay. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. But that's also maybe a scumbag. I can do that. Yeah. Sorry, Paula. You're gonna watch this on YouTube.
So I think there are several things here worth mentioning. So why do we want more diversity? Does it really improve performance? Well, there are cases that show yes, but I mean, there are a lot of studies that actually show that if you impose that artificially, that actually harms performance. Because what happens is, for instance, if you install the quota, then what happens, we're seeking for women for certain positions as a must, but not actually choosing the best candidate. But now we need to choose a woman because we need women in that department, that role, and this and that, right? So there's been studies that show that actually quotas don't necessarily work. But why do we want this diversity? That's, I think, the primary question. And for me, a lot boils down to, for instance, differences in opinions. Because, I mean, performance is one thing, but for instance, having different viewpoints, even around the risk of the company, of an entity, of a project, etc., having different viewpoints on the risks can show you different threats, different ways how it can go. And it not only goes to diversity in gender, but diversity in backgrounds, in cultures, in countries where you're coming from, and so on and so forth. So this diversity of opinion, I think, is one of the key aspects here. But then how do we get there? I mean, I think that when we talk about how men can help kind of incorporate this, is they actually need to first understand that there is a value in exactly that thing. Because if you don't understand where's the value, you're not very eager to do a buy-in into a certain position or situation. And then when I personally think about it, for me, this all, I'm sorry to say it, but it all starts with kids. Because, you know, I mean, I look at these weird statistics and weird reports. I mean, even today in the US, there is a thing that when a girl goes to primary school and she's not really good in maths, the parents say, oh, don't worry, because you're not going to do this. Just study English and something else. I mean, I'm from Poland. In Poland, there would never be such a thing. The girls were studying maths exactly like boys. And then you compare some, you know, emerging markets or not that developed countries, and it seems that the diversity there is much better, or equal treatment is much better than in the most advanced countries in the world. So let's start with even primary schools and then go through business schools, universities, to actually educate us. Where is the value? Where's the value of diversity showing in the world of business, and why it's worth to do a buy-in into this idea?
I thought that's a really interesting point, like how far back it has to go. But even just things like kind of gender pay gaps, where they kind of looked into it, where the smallest one I think is in Sweden. And the reason for that is because even though other Scandinavian countries have similar kind of, you know, policies and setups, the actual policy in Sweden is that both parents get a set amount of time, and it's use it or lose it. You can't switch it. And that is, they think, is the biggest factor as to why it has the narrowest gap. So it's like, it's quite a policy change, which I think then comes back to almost like the Parliament view, like it's much further back, I think, even than just day to day, because I think we've made big steps, but like if you're having that conversation at such an early age that women can't do maths, it's crazy. Yeah.
I've been talking to an organisation that sets up debating societies in state schools, and that's sort of talking to the socioeconomic gap as well. With regards to parliamentarians, but they have found that they're struggling to get girls signing up to the debating society, and so it does start back there, and we need to be sort of making sure that girls from a young age are used to having their voices heard and feel that there's value in that. But equally, the boys need to understand why that's important.